Mohan and Lila had grown old together in a small apartment where time moved slowly. The walls had seen laughter, worry, and many quiet prayers. Every corner carried memories of raising their children, teaching them right from wrong, and sacrificing comfort so the future could be brighter. Now the apartment felt larger than it ever had before, not because it had changed, but because voices were missing. Silence filled the rooms from morning until night, steady and heavy. Their children had not left in one clear moment. It happened little by little, like sand slipping through open fingers. First came fewer visits, then shorter phone calls, and finally only messages on special days. Mohan would still check his phone every evening, hoping to see a name appear on the screen. Lila would listen carefully whenever the phone rang, even if it was only a wrong number. Hope stayed longer than it should have. They never argued about the distance. They understood that life pulls people in many directions. Their children had jobs, families, and ambitions far away from this quiet place. Mohan and Lila told themselves that love did not always need presents. Still, when days turned into years, that belief began to feel thin. The warmth they once shared with their children faded into polite words and formal greetings. Mohan spent his days fixing small things around the house. He repaired a loose chair leg, adjusted a leaking tap, and cleaned the balcony every morning. These tasks gave shape to time. Lila filled her hours with cooking simple meals and tending to a few plants near the window. She talked to them softly, as if they could understand her feelings. The plants grew well, perhaps because they were listened to. Some evenings, Mohan and Lila would sit together without speaking. The television played quietly, but neither of them watched it closely. Their thoughts stayed elsewhere, often drifting back to moments when the house was loud with footsteps and laughter. Lila remembered helping with homework late at night. Mohan remembered teaching his children how to ride bicycles in the street below. Those memories felt close and far at the same time. One afternoon, as the sun leaned low in the sky, a letter arrived. It was unusual, as they rarely received mail anymore. The envelope was plain and carried no return address. Mohan picked it up slowly, examining it with curiosity. Lila watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands resting on a cloth she had been folding. Something about the letter felt important, though neither of them could explain why. Mohan opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old metal key taped to the corner. The letter was written in neat, careful handwriting. It mentioned a mansion located far from the city, in a quiet hilly region where few people lived. The writer claimed the property belonged to someone from Lila's family, a relative she had not seen in decades. The letter requested that Mohan and Lila visit the place and open it, using the key provided. There was no explanation beyond that. No greeting filled with emotion, no long story. Just a request, calm and direct. Mohan read the letter again, slower this time. Lila stepped closer and read it herself. Her face showed surprise, then uncertainty, and finally a quiet sense of acceptance. She remembered the relative mentioned, a distant uncle who had chosen a life away from family and society. They talked about the letter late into the night. Questions rose and fell, but no answers came. Why them and not others? Why now after so many years? What waited for them in a place so far away? Still, something in the letter felt respectful, almost careful, as if the writer had thought deeply about choosing them. Lila felt a pull she could not explain, and Mohan trusted that feeling. The next morning, they decided to go. They packed lightly, taking only what they needed. Mohan checked the car carefully, while Lila prepared food for the journey. They did not inform their children. Not out of anger, but because this journey felt personal, almost private. It was something meant only for the two of them. The road out of the city was long and winding. Buildings slowly gave way to open land, and familiar sounds faded behind them. Phone signals weakened, and the world grew quieter with every mile. Mohan focused on driving, his hands steady on the wheel. Lila looked out the window, watching trees pass by like silent witnesses. The air felt different, cleaner and calmer. As they traveled, memories returned again, stronger this time. Mohan thought about the years he spent working long hours to support the family. He wondered if he had missed moments that mattered. Lila thought about the many times she had put her children's needs before her own. She questioned nothing she had done, yet a quiet sadness rested in her heart. They shared these thoughts in small pieces, speaking gently and without blame. By the time evening arrived, mist covered the hills. The road narrowed, and signs became rare. The car climbed higher, and the temperature dropped. Lila held the key in her hand, turning it slowly between her fingers. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried meaning beyond metal. Mohan noticed her silence but did not interrupt it. Then, through the mist, the mansion appeared. It stood alone, large and still, surrounded by trees that seemed to protect it from the outside world. The building looked old but strong, its structure untouched by time. Tall gates blocked the path, covered in rust but not broken. Mohan parked the car, and both of them sat quietly for a moment, taking in the sight. Stepping out of the car felt like stepping into another life. The air was cold and fresh. Lila walked toward the gate, her steps slow and careful. She inserted the key into the lock, unsure if it would even turn after so many years. With a soft sound, the lock gave way. The gates opened slowly, as if they had been waiting. They walked up the long path toward the entrance. The mansion did not feel empty. It felt patient, as if it had been holding its breath for this exact moment. Mohan placed his hand gently on Lila's shoulder. They shared a look filled with trust and curiosity. Whatever waited inside, they would face it together. When Lila unlocked the front door, it opened without resistance. The inside smelled of wood and age, but not decay. Furniture was covered, floors were clean, and the space felt cared for. Light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. It was clear that this place had not been abandoned. It had simply been left undisturbed. Mohan closed the door behind them, and the sound echoed softly through the halls. Lila took a deep breath. Neither of them spoke. In that quiet moment, they both felt it. Their lives had shifted. The silence they carried from the city felt different here. It no longer felt empty. It felt full of something waiting to be discovered. They did not yet know why they had been brought here. They did not know what secrets the mansion held. But as they stood together in that vast space, one truth became clear. This journey was not an accident. It was the beginning of something that would change the meaning of their silence forever. Morning arrived quietly at the mansion, as if it did not want to disturb its guests. Soft light entered through tall windows and spread gently across the wide halls. Mohan woke early, guided by habit more than comfort. He stepped out of the bedroom and stood still for a moment, listening. The house was silent, but it was not empty. It felt alert, aware, as though it had been waiting for them to wake. Lila joined him soon after, wrapped in a shawl. She looked rested in a way she had not felt for years. The air inside the mansion felt calm and clean, unlike the heavy silence of their city apartment. They walked slowly through the halls, taking in the details. Old paintings lined the walls, their colors faded but not forgotten. Each face in the portrait seemed serious, thoughtful, and quietly observant. They entered the dining hall and found the table already set. Plates were clean, chairs arranged neatly, and dust was absent. Lila paused, surprised by the order. This place had not been abandoned in care, only in presence. Someone had ensured it remained ready. Mohan opened a window, letting fresh air fill the room. Outside, trees moved gently with the wind, as if greeting them. They explored room by room without hurry. Every space told a story without words. A music room held a piano that had been covered carefully. Lila lifted the cloth and pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly, rich and clear. She smiled, touched by the care that had preserved such beauty. Mohan noticed shelves filled with books, their pages clean and arranged by topic rather than size. The library caught their attention most. It was large, quiet, and filled with sunlight. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling, holding books, files, and sealed envelopes. A wooden desk stood in the center, polished and free of dust. Lila felt drawn to the desk and approached it slowly. On top lay a single envelope, placed neatly, as if it had been waiting only for her. Her name was written clearly on the front. The handwriting matched the letter they had received. Lila sat down before opening it. Mohan stood behind her, resting his hands lightly on the back of the chair. The room felt still, almost respectful. Lila opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The letter was long, written with care and patience. It spoke of her uncle, a man who had chosen distance from society but not from thought. He had watched the world quietly, learning who remembered their roots and who walked away from them. He wrote of observing his extended family from afar, seeing who stayed kind even when forgotten. Mohan and Lila were mentioned often, always with warmth and respect. The letter explained that the mansion was only one part of a larger truth. Her uncle had built a life of careful planning, investing wisely and living simply. He trusted no one easily, but he believed in character. He saw how Mohan and Lila had lived with dignity even when their own children stepped away. That, he wrote, was why they were chosen. At the end of the letter, clear instructions were given. They were asked to open the lower level of the mansion and enter a secured room. The key they carried would unlock the first door, but not what waited beyond. A second set of instructions lay there, waiting for them. Lila folded the letter slowly, her hands steady but her heart full. They sat quietly for some time after reading. Mohan broke the silence gently, saying that whatever they found, they would face it together. Lila nodded. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity and a quiet sense of purpose. They stood up and walked toward the staircase leading downward. The steps to the lower level were wide and solid. Lights turned on automatically as they descended, revealing clean walls and polished floors. This part of the mansion felt newer, stronger, built for protection rather than comfort. At the bottom stood a large metal door, smooth and unmarked. Lila held the key again, feeling its weight return. She placed the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The door opened without resistance. Inside was a room unlike any they had seen before. Shelves of metal cases lined the walls. A long table stood at the center, holding folders and documents arranged with care. The room was cool, quiet, and perfectly organized. Mohan picked up one of the folders and opened it. Inside were financial records, property deeds, and legal documents. Everything was clear, detailed, and properly marked. Lila opened another folder and found similar records. As they read, a pattern emerged. Accounts, investments, and holdings spread across many regions, all carefully managed. Numbers appeared again and again, large and exact. Mohan paused, checking the figures twice. Lila looked over his shoulder, her breath catching softly. The total value written across multiple documents was the same each time. 280 million. The number felt unreal, like something meant for stories, not for people like them. They did not speak at first. The room seemed to hold its breath with them. Lila sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the moment press gently against her chest. Mohan rested his hands on the table, grounding himself. Neither of them felt excitement in the way one might expect. Instead, they felt responsibility. They spent hours reading every document carefully. They wanted no confusion, no misunderstanding. Everything was legal, transparent, and clearly prepared over many years. Their names appeared as the final holders of it all. No conditions were attached beyond a simple message written at the end of one file. It asked them to use the wealth with wisdom, not noise. As the day passed, they moved through the mansion with new awareness. The walls felt different now, not because of money, but because of trust placed in them. Lila looked out over the hills from an upper window and felt a quiet strength rise within her. Mohan walked through the halls, imagining the possibilities and responsibilities ahead. That evening, they shared a simple meal in the large kitchen. The space felt warm, even though it was much larger than what they were used to. They talked softly, not about wealth, but about meaning. They spoke about age, time, and what truly lasts when noise fades away. Mohan said that wealth had arrived late in their lives, but perhaps that was the point. They had already learned what mattered. Lila agreed. She said that silence had taught them patience, and distance had taught them clarity. This gift did not feel like a reward. It felt like a task. As night settled over the hills, the mansion lights glowed gently. Mohan and Lila sat together in the quiet living hall. The silence they once feared now felt full and steady. They knew that their lives had changed, but not in the way the world might expect. The house had not just opened its doors to them. It had trusted them with its purpose. And as they sat side by side, one thought settled clearly in both their hearts. This was not the end of their story. It was the moment their quiet lives began to speak in a new way. The next few days passed slowly, as if time itself had decided to move with care. Mohan and Lila did not rush into decisions. They treated every hour with respect, knowing that haste could disturb the calm they had finally found. Each morning, they walked through the mansion and the surrounding land, observing, thinking, and listening to their own thoughts. The wealth they had discovered stayed in their minds like a quiet presence, never loud, never demanding, but always there. They returned often to the library, reading letters and notes left behind by Lila's uncle. These writings were not about money alone. They spoke about patience, observation, and the value of quiet strength. He had written about watching people over many years and learning who remained kind when no one was watching. Mohan felt a deep connection to those words, as if the man had known him without ever meeting him. Lila found herself thinking about her children more than she expected. Not with anger or sadness, but with a calm understanding. She realized that distance had taught her something valuable. Love did not disappear when people walked away, but it did change shape. It became quieter and less demanding. She accepted this truth without pain, which surprised her. The mansion had given her space to breathe and see clearly. Mohan began organizing the documents again, this time with a different purpose. He wanted to understand how the wealth could be managed without drawing attention. The instructions were clear and helpful, prepared by someone who had thought about the future carefully. Trusted advisors were listed, people known for honesty rather than fame. Mohan contacted a few of them, speaking slowly and clearly, explaining only what was necessary. The responses were respectful and calm. No one rushed them or pushed them toward quick action. This reassured Mohan and Lila. They felt that the people chosen by Lila's uncle shared the same values of patience and care. Meetings were arranged, not in busy offices, but in quiet spaces where conversation could flow without pressure. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens behind the mansion, Lila noticed how empty the land felt despite its beauty. The paths were clean, the trees healthy, yet something was missing. She stopped near an old bench and sat down. Mohan joined her, sensing that she had something to say. After a long pause, she spoke about loneliness, not her own, but the kind she had seen in others. She talked about elders who lived quietly, often unseen, their stories unheard. She remembered neighbors from their old apartment, people who spent days without conversation. Mohan listened carefully. He had seen the same thing during his morning walks back in the city. These thoughts stayed with them as they returned inside. That evening, they talked for hours. Not about numbers or property, but about purpose. They asked themselves what kind of impact they wanted to leave behind. They did not want attention or praise. They wanted to create something that would offer dignity, connection, and peace. The idea formed slowly, shaped by their own experiences of silence and distance. They imagined the mansion as a place of welcome rather than isolation. A place where elders could come, not to be managed or controlled, but to be respected. A place where stories could be shared, skills passed on, and time valued. The idea felt right, fitting the quiet strength of the house and the values of the man who had built it. Over the next week, they worked with advisors to explore how this vision could become real. Plans were drawn carefully, step by step. They discussed staff, care standards, and community involvement. Every detail mattered to them. They wanted the place to feel like a home, not an institution. Mohan insisted on simplicity, while Lila focused on warmth and comfort. As plans took shape, news began to travel quietly. Local workers noticed activity around the mansion. Suppliers were contacted. Small improvements were made to paths and rooms. Nothing was rushed. The work was steady and respectful. People in nearby villages grew curious, but no one was told more than necessary. Then messages began arriving from their children. At first, they were short and cautious. Simple greetings, polite questions. Mohan and Lila read them together. They felt no shock or pride, only understanding. It was natural for attention to return when change occurred. They did not judge this behavior. They simply observed it. Lila replied kindly, without sharing details. She spoke about being well and finding peace. Mohan did the same. They did not hide, but they did not explain. Their children responded with more interest, asking to visit. Mohan and Lila took time before answering. They agreed that their doors would remain open, but their hearts would move carefully. One evening, while reviewing plans in the living hall, Lila paused and looked around. The mansion felt alive now, not with noise, but with intention. She realized that the silence she once feared had transformed into clarity. Mohan felt the same. The wealth no longer felt heavy. It felt guided, shaped by purpose. They visited nearby communities and spoke with local leaders. They listened more than they spoke. Needs were discussed openly, without promises made too quickly. Mohan admired how Lila connected with people through quiet understanding. She did not offer solutions immediately. She offered attention, which mattered just as much. As the weeks passed, the first guests arrived. Elders who had lived alone, some with families far away, others with no one left. They arrived uncertain, carrying small bags and larger stories. Mohan and Lila welcomed them personally, learning their names, listening to their pasts. The mansion began to fill with gentle conversation and shared meals. The change was subtle but powerful. Laughter returned to halls that had known only echoes. Gardens were walked again, benches used, rooms warmed by presence. Mohan and Lila watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. They did not feel like owners. They felt like caretakers of something meaningful. At night, when the house settled into rest, Mohan and Lila sat together as they always had. They spoke about the day, the people they had met, and the small moments that mattered. The wealth they once could not imagine now felt like a tool, not a reward. It had arrived at the right time, not to change who they were, but to allow them to be more of themselves. They understood now why they had been chosen. It was not because they had been forgotten, but because they had endured without bitterness. Silence had shaped them, and distance had strengthened them. As they looked toward the future, they felt steady and clear. The mansion no longer stood as a symbol of isolation. It had become a place of connection and quiet strength. And in that transformation, Mohan and Lila found a deeper sense of purpose than wealth could ever provide. The mansion slowly became something new, not through loud change, but through steady care. Mohan and Lila believed that true growth did not need noise. Each day followed a simple rhythm. Morning walks through the garden, shared meals in the wide dining hall, and long conversations that flowed without pressure. The house that once stood alone now carried gentle life within its walls. The elders who arrived were different in many ways, yet shared a common feeling. Each had known distance in some form. Some had children who lived far away, others had no family left at all. They came with small bags and careful steps, unsure of what to expect. Mohan and Lila welcomed each one personally, offering time rather than instruction. Slowly, trust grew. The mansion changed with them. Rooms once kept closed were opened and filled with quiet purpose. A reading room became a place for shared stories. The music room came alive again, with soft melodies played in the evenings. The kitchen smelled of warm food and shared effort. Nothing felt forced. Everything felt earned. Lila spent her days listening. She sat with guests on benches under trees, hearing stories of long lives filled with work, love, and loss. She never hurried these conversations. She believed that being heard was a form of care. Mohan focused on structure, ensuring that systems worked smoothly without becoming cold. He wanted everyone to feel safe, not managed. As months passed, word spread gently. People spoke of the place with respect, not excitement. It was known as a quiet home where elders were treated with dignity. There were no banners, no announcements. The mansion did not seek attention. It offered space. That was enough. Their children visited one by one. Each arrival carried hesitation. Mohan and Lila greeted them warmly, without questions or judgment. Conversations were polite at first, careful and distant. Over time, honesty found its way in. Their children saw the life their parents had built, not just the wealth, but the purpose behind it. No arguments followed. No demands were made. Mohan and Lila made it clear that love remained, but choices had been made. The mansion was not a prize or a lesson. It was simply the result of a path walked with patience. Their children listened, some with regret, others with quiet acceptance. Lila noticed something important during those visits. The elders watched these reunions quietly. They saw pieces of their own stories reflected there. Some smiled gently, Others looked away. Lila realized that healing did not always mean fixing the past. Sometimes it meant allowing truth to sit peacefully. Mohan and Lila continued to manage the wealth carefully. They kept their lives simple, living in a small section of the mansion as they always had. They wore the same kind of clothes, ate the same kind of meals. Nothing about them changed except their calm grew deeper. The money served the work, not the other way around. Local communities became involved in small ways. Teachers visited to share skills. Doctors came regularly, offering care with kindness. Young people listened to stories they had never heard before. Generations met naturally, without programs or schedules. The mansion became a bridge, not a center. One evening, during a shared meal, an elder stood and spoke. His voice was soft, but the room grew still. He thanked Mohan and Lila for creating a place where he felt seen again. Others nodded in agreement. Lila lowered her eyes, moved by the sincerity. Mohan simply smiled, knowing that this moment mattered more than any number ever could. As time passed, Mohan felt his steps slow, and Lila rested more often. Age reminded them gently of its presence. They were not afraid. They had lived fully, even in silence. Now, they lived with meaning. They began preparing the next steps, not in urgency, but with clarity. They established a simple structure to ensure the mansion would continue its purpose beyond them. Trusted people were chosen, not for skill alone, but for character. Instructions were written clearly, not in legal language, but in values. Care, patience, dignity, and quiet strength guided every word. Their children were informed, not as heirs, but as witnesses. Mohan explained that the greatest inheritance was not money, but example. Lila added that love did not demand ownership. Their children understood more than they expected. Some cried softly. Others held their parents' hands longer than before. One afternoon, Mohan and Lila sat together on the terrace, watching the hills change color with the season. The air was cool, the sky wide and calm. Lila rested her head on Mohan's shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words felt unnecessary. They thought about the journey that had brought them here. The silence of the apartment. The letter without a return address. The key that opened more than a door. Each step had felt uncertain at the time, yet clear in hindsight. Life had not rewarded them for waiting. It had trusted them. The mansion no longer felt remote. It felt rooted. People came and went, stories continued, and time moved forward gently. Mohan and Lila knew they would not see everything that would grow from their work. That did not trouble them. They had planted enough. One morning, Lila woke later than usual. Mohan sat beside her, holding her hand. They shared a look filled with peace. She smiled softly and closed her eyes again. Mohan stayed there, calm and steady, until the room grew quiet. He felt no panic, only gratitude. In the days that followed, the mansion moved gently through grief. Elders shared memories, lit candles, and sat together in silence. Mohan stood strong, supported by the community they had built. He felt Lila's presence everywhere, in every conversation and quiet act of care. Years later, when Mohan too rested, the mansion continued as it always had. No statues were built. No names were carved in stone. Their legacy lived in the way people treated one another within those walls. In the patience of listening. In the dignity of care. The children visited often, not out of obligation, but understanding. They saw what their parents had created and carried that lesson forward. The mansion stood, not as a symbol of wealth, but as proof that silence, when met with kindness, could become purpose. And so, the place that once waited in isolation continued to open its doors quietly. Not to the world, but to those who needed it most. In that quiet offering, Mohan and Lila lived on, not through memory alone, but through meaning that never faded.